Hello everybody, this is Project Alpha. My name is Nikolai Feldman and you're watching War Diary Live with Alexey Arestovich. Alexey, hello. Good evening. Alright, so let's start from the front. Ganovka, Uspenovka and other settlements near Kurakhova. A simple question. It looked like there was some encirclement. Our troops were surrounded here. Did we leave it on time or did we not? Are we staying there way too long than we should have? What do you think? We do not have fresh data, Nikolai. Nobody is showing, Russians are not showing the area being taken, do not have pictures in their channels. And according to the front outline, we are still holding some positions. And according to some panicky statements in Facebook, and other social media, military who are stationed there are saying that since summer the roads were completely shot through and they just have an order to stay, so they're staying and holding. General opinion of those posts was that the person making them actually is there in person, so probably true. Command post Hortitsa is making a statement that the command line is trying to stop Russian troops. Nazar Voloshin, the speaker for Hortitsa, made a statement in TV Marathon Live saying that our tactics is to try to weaken the enemy, to make them exhaust their troops. And according to some other media, some troops, Ukrainian soldiers, were withdrawn, but not all of them. Some are still holding position. Well, I would say, Nikolai, that allowing your troops to be encircled is a very peculiar way of weakening the enemy. You know, one of the main goals of defense is to disrupt the enemy's advance by causing severe losses in life force, in equipment, in all kinds of hardware. And if our commanders did study their first course well, they would remember that it makes sense to stop holding position when your troops are starting to lose more than the enemy. So it makes sense to hold your position in defense mode as long as you're wasting more enemies trying to take it rather than your troops. The moment this balance shifts or becomes uncomfortable, unsustainable, is when you need to withdraw. And you can look at the map, see here that, see, it's a classic pincer motions on that picture. They look very much, even here on the other one as well, right? Smaller pincer, bigger pincer, near Neskuchna. And there are some positive news in all that. And one way or the other, we are withdrawing troops, right? They could have said that stay there and fight till the end, but apparently we are withdrawing. A week, 2 weeks, 10 days, a month later than we should have, but at least we're trying to withdraw. So that's some positive that we can derive from here. I wanted to ask you, Alexey, about that little piece here near Zelenovka. Are these big pincers? Oh, this is a motion towards the road, Zaporozhye, Donetsk. Yeah, with a task to cut this road. And generally it is already under fire control at that distance. And there is also a river here on the other side, and you can see that Russian troops are moving on along the other side of the river. So it looks like all that area where Kurakhov Ukrainian group is still located, we probably should be withdrawing our troops here to Constantinople and start holding the enemy over here. Right, we should be holding it alongside the natural barriers near Razliv, that area. A good hint to the guys from Deep State who are maintaining this map to make a duplicate map that will be showing not just the roads, but also the terrain. One needs to understand the map of the roads, the railroads, and terrain. Without terrain, you cannot really understand situation, without elevations and ravines. So this is a satellite image. We need terrain. We need a real data on heights. Right, that's better. You can see some of the hills here. Where are the natural barriers? These are the heights, right? Heights, ravines, and water barriers of all kinds. So you can see how the enemy is advancing. You can see the right flank near Shevchenko. They are covered by that hill. So from the north, from Slavyanka, our troops cannot see them. right? Because they're under the cover of that hill. So where could we take in defense successfully? If we put our defense right here on top of that hill, we would be shooting them up as they progress, and they would have had to storm us from the bottom up. And recently I've seen an interesting military thought. One of our Central Command authors took the Hamlet's pose and said, how? One of the generals, I'm forgetting the name of one of the speakers of one of these command groups, what to do in a situation where the enemy has an overwhelming advantage and we have to hold the front with a length of 1,700 kilometers. Interesting story, right? Apparently they don't know that there are ways to deal with that, and they probably missed their third lesson on tactics, because the answer is simple. You minimize the front line, you stand on the natural barriers, and you group your troops in such a fashion that you do have some reserves to cull the enemy's advancements. Basically, if Russians are drawing their small pincers and big pincers, you can see them here, right? We need special detachments that will be cutting off these pincers at the base. Or, and this is actually the most dangerous moment for the enemy, when they stretched themselves and broke through our front line, before they enabled proper logistics to this breakthrough, before they get reinforcements, this is when you need to attack them. This is when you cut them at the base, and you basically catch them with the pants down. It only seems that if they're on the offensive, they're all brave and mighty. There is always a moment, depending upon terrain and how much ammo they took with them, there's always a moment when they're at the limit, at their capacity of their ammo. For example, they got to Konstantinopolsk. That's where you attack them on the flank, maybe on both sides. If you're doing it right, you can also attack them on the front. And you catch them with their pants down. You dispel them, you surround them, and destroy them. Germans, back in the Second World War, were fatiguing Russian army, Red Army, in that fashion throughout the whole 43, 44, and 45. Manstein used a similar tactics over in the north, even before that. And Russian army suffered, Red Army suffered colossal losses. Very often attempting to encircle the Germans, they ended up being surrounded themselves. But apparently our commanders did not study the experience of the Second World War, or if they did not understand it. For example, we have a sample of counterattacking measures near Pokrovsk, near Shevchenko. I'm looking at the map. I understand that we probably attacked them in the front. So we didn't cut them at the root of the protrusion, we attacked them in a frontal fashion. This is the most complex, the most difficult way of doing it. Why? One can pose the question. I'm dreaming to gather all our commanders under some commission at the end of the war and have a very soul-to-soul conversation with them. Why are you doing it this way? Why were you doing it in this fashion and not in another? I am very curious to hear the answers for posterity. What was guiding these decisions that they were making? For 3 years in a row, repeating the same dumb template, and we're failing to learn to deal with it. How to qualify that? I am running out of my vocabulary. I guess my vocabulary is too poor for this, to describe it. All right. On this direction, we apparently have recently replaced the commander of Operative Tactical Group Donetsk because of Russian continuous successful motion. Alexander Tarnavsky is a new commander of that direction. Can you say anything about him, whether he is better than his predecessor Lutsenko as the commander? Well, Nikolai, we'll see, judging by his actions. It is difficult to provide some estimation preemptively when he is just on a third or fifth day in his new command and he is dealing with the very difficult situation of his front falling apart like an ink drop. There are different opinions about him. in relation to his activity in Kherson and about counteroffensive last year. To the contrary, there are other opinions that he is a rather tough commander, understandably not a Napoleon, but very sturdy and very well-shaped commander. Again, it's difficult to foretell before his actions become visible. People can grow, sometimes they don't, but we'll see what happens. I just don't believe that you can do a lot of very bright, successful motions on this front, because destroyed system of command cannot be rebuilt in 2 days. And how was it destroyed? It was destroyed by the lies. This whole map reflects one very simple thought. Not so obvious for civilians, but very obvious for military who knows where to look. Looking at the situation on the front, continuous pincer motions here and there. Pincers are only possible when you lose command. Enemy can aggregate enough forces on your flanks and you will not be able to do anything, only if you have lost a degree of command. That implies that our command cannot build a system of feedback and system of control that would be getting proper data from the front. And the disconnect between the operative tactical command and operative strategic groups of command, so small temporary command and big temporary command on a certain direction of a front. And they do suffer a severe disconnect from reality. And one of the main issues that they have is that Syrsky and his command, his team, they are fond of removing brigade commanders very quickly, in a very rapid fashion. Lost a small position, removed. Refused to fulfill an idiotic command, removed. Tried to discuss an order, which actually should be a tradition in the army. Officers should discuss and should brainstorm possible actions, because commanders of a platoon, commander of a company, commander of a brigade, they're not infantrymen. Each of them is solving a task at their own level, and they're not allowed to participate. So they have to lie. They have to provide false data to the command. So when you're 3 days being surrounded and you're being asked from above, is everything good? They do report everything is fine, for fear of being removed immediately. And that leads to the tactical command and strategic command not having a real map of actions, because the real situation doesn't look like what they see. And therefore you see on the front continuous news about pincer movements. And you often hear news from Pokrovsk and alike, where we actually prepared fortifications, but somehow the enemy snuck in there before our infantry had a chance to occupy it. How is that possible? Only in the situation when there is a lot of lies, when command up top is not aware of the real situation on the ground. And whether Tarnavsky will be able to reverse the trend, I don't know. Arty Green, a Ukrainian soldier, I understand he already retired, but he commented on this. He's known in the blogosphere, and he commented on these movements as replacement of one idiots with the others. And he names all the last names that are present in these rotations. He calls Syrsky, Sodal, Tarnavsky, Moskalev, Lutsenko. He basically says that these people should not be commanding our troops, period. What can you say about such a judgment? Is it true? Well, I understand him a lot, and I understand his statement, because all actions on our front indicate that these commanders, if they're not completely dumb, they're at least very limited, gifted in a very limited fashion. And I want to remind our viewers, how did these people come to command Ukrainian military? These are the people who, in the situation of the 90s, when most people left the army, only the fanatics and the idiots remained in the army. Fanatics, there may be 1% or tenth of 1% in the army. The rest were people who could not command their own business, so they decided to stick with the army. And today these people are generals, and these are the ones who are managing our troops. And that's why we should not be expecting Hindenburgs and Napoleons from that group. What we could be expecting from this group, if there was a proper system of promotion to the general position, for example, to the higher command, these people would be able to give a sturdy average level of performance. And in the army, if you're performing on a strong medium level, you could actually achieve certain things. Because even Napoleon, when he was facing a rather mediocre commanders who were doing everything to the T by the book, for example, Prey-Seychelles, a 2-day battle where main role was played by artillery, when he fought with Russian troops near Königsberg, Napoleon suffered a defeat. And his opponent was not too stellar. Napoleon actually undertook a very interesting maneuver to prevent Russian troops from going to their winter quarters, and he failed. Just because the command put the Russian troops where they were, created the right defense line, and used artillery in the proper fashion. There is nothing you can do then. You can be Napoleon and you will still fail if the defense is organized, at least on a medium proper level. Unfortunately, our military were developing a negative selection for too long. In order to create a positive selection, it's another conversation. I can easily suggest at least one criteria how to instill that. If you have several candidates, for example, 3 or 4 candidates from platoon commanders, you appoint the one to run the company who won tactical exercises among his peers. And same situation with general. You appoint the general, the one who actually won the training exercise from other contenders to that position, and not the one whom you were drinking with, who is your drinking buddy. So this is just one of the parameters, one of the criteria that could be used. It probably deserves a whole other stream to go over all of the criteria that could be part of it. But if we just followed these rules, we could have taken people into our roster who had won these exercises 7 or 8 times amidst their peers. And then how do you grow generals when you don't have divisions and corps and armies, right? What is Ukrainian general in this view? Colonel is commanding a brigade. What is general commanding? We do not have detachments befitting the general. Our generals are temporary people heading temporary command post. So how do you grow them? He doesn't have division, he doesn't have an army. Now we're trying to create some corps, and I was laughing out loud when I heard one of the general commanders in Ukraine saying that when he was asked, why do we not have divisions? He said, we do not have enough resources to form divisions, given that the corps that they're forming is actually a higher level unit than a division. So we have resources to form corps and we don't have resources to form divisions. I don't know whom that statement is targeting, but probably with our paradoxical stupidity, we're aiming to win this war. Right. In the infantry this week, we were hearing a lot of statements made, how it will change and why it is important. Exactly. So Drapati is a new commander, and Sukharevsky is another person in charge of special command, who recently came out with a statement that we have a battle laser that will allow us to shoot down Russian missiles. When I was studying in the academy, this was called an attempt to cover the rotten with the bright, with the shiny. And I don't have specific qualms with Drapatov or Sukharevsky because according to their biography, they actually are pretty good commanders, but they have to cover the rot with these statements. And that's what they're doing. At the same time, we have a scandal in another pontoon brigade where we were apparently crucifying some of the improperly drafted drunk men thrown to the front. Well, this is why they had to come out and make statements about some battle laser to distract the attention. But it brings up an old question. How do you communicate with a society? Do you tell them truth, or do you concoct a beautiful fairy tale for them? I side with telling the truth for a simple reason, because otherwise society will never grow up. When they see how things are actually in reality, they may start to learn and understand what is happening, and they may start thinking and think realistically and make possibly right decisions. Based on the fairy tale, you cannot make a right decision. There's no way. And when you see these statements about the purple laser or some other thing, that's when your society is failing to learn. And this is probably explaining the situation why we are fighting worse on the third year of this war than at the beginning. There was never a precedence in history. The dumbest armies, the dumbest military leaders, the dumbest political leadership, after 3 years of war, were fighting better than during the first year. They were just learning. We are the most unique army and social system who are fighting worse on year 3 than we did on year 1. Don't know how that is possible. I guess historians will be studying this unique experience. When I hear that Ukraine has a unique experience, that's what comes to mind. Our unique experience is in figuring out how to fight worse on the third year of war than on the first year. Right, Alexey, even on this investigation that was published recently, if some commanders have time to torture their subordinates, oh yeah, this is a very remarkable investigation. Apparently, our system placed a relative, which is forbidden by the army code, to command one of his relatives below. So lieutenant, on the lower level, who is doing all these atrocities to his new recruits, is also frightening them with the relative being a commander of this front, right? So he's a company commander. It's like nothing. It's the very lowest level. And yet he still has enough guts to behave like that, to not follow the code, and to start torturing those drunks that were brought by the drafting committee. Now, again, drafting committee shouldn't be in business of bringing drunkards to the military. But we do not have a system of military justice who would also punish the company commander as well as the drafting commission for this. And this reminds me the story of Bakhmut and Solidar when we had thousands of refusers. And in our system, everything is set so weirdly that commander cannot give a refuser to the military police, and military police cannot investigate that refusing to serve until the medical commission processes the refuser. And there were times when in commission regionally they had about 4,000 of refusers, and the doctors were taking maybe 100 men a day working from 9 to 2 p.m. So it all got to such a atrocious level that all these refusers were just laughing in the face of military police and saying, "What can you do with me?" Not until I go through medical commission. And nobody changed the flow of medical commission, nobody changed the flow of that routine. Nobody supposedly can do that, right? We only can make some purple lasers and shoot our Hell missile that will supposedly fly to Vladivostok, right, in Russia. But we cannot figure out how to deal with refusers and how to deal with these atrocities when a company commander tortures his subordinates because his uncle is the commander of the front. So this example just covers the whole depth of problems that we have. As an example, you can take a civilian who was drafted, who was trained, who was brought to the front. And on every step, we're doing things wrong. We draft wrong people in the wrong fashion. We draft drug users, drunkards, people who are probably going to leave their position. We fail to train them well. We fail to bring them to the right troops where they would probably be trained and at least adopt that responsibility of a soldier. Then they get tortured by the local czars who think that because their uncles are commanders of the front, they can do anything. And then you need to send commission, and then Umerov with his commissions shows up on the horizon talking about military inspections that will come. And I want to ask another question. When Voronchenko was removed from his position, the head of military commissions, why was he removed? And who of his commission will go now instead of him? Our main body of military commission of Minister of Defense is disabled. So whatever is left of it is now going to the weird brigade where the relations are broken. That was brought up by social media. Okay, they'll come there. But what about hundreds of other brigades? Anybody going to visit them? In September of 24, Mariana Bezugla, Alexey, was posting that Umerov fired Voronchenko for making a statement during a gathering with Zelensky about a catastrophic situation with training of armed forces in Ukraine, and supposedly they did not find confirmation to his statement. So what the new inspector will find if they could not acknowledge the fault with training system, right? He'll probably find some lieutenant as a guilty party with all his relatives, but what will happen later in this brigade and in other brigades, that's a big question. All right, on this week we also had a big informational breakthrough in regards to this topic. Valery Marcus, the Staff Sergeant of 47th Brigade, stopped being silent and actually started talking about how it was. And I think 47th Brigade is the brightest example. On one hand, Marcus being a very bright media figure, his authority, himself being known in the social media, he realized a great aspect of recruiting program. Thousands of people were coming to see him when he was touring, drafting new recruits. Hundreds of people were signing up. But then according to Markov, what he is saying now, real leadership of the 47th Brigade and above them, they were actually calling down all these initiatives. The volunteers were given most problems with processing papers, with getting to serve in the 47th where they wanted to go. They were diluted with also those people who are drafted by force to make sure that it's not so easy to... It's not only the volunteers that the 47th Brigade get. I don't know if you followed what Marcus made in his statements this week. No, I did not have to, Nikolai. I actually am very familiar with what he is describing. I'll give you an example. About a month before our offensive in the south, where 47th went, probably a month and a half before that offensive in Zaporozhye, two soldiers come to me at the gas station. They recognized me and they said, "Hey, we are for 47th Brigade. We're stationed nearby. Come over, be a guest." So I decided to come visit them. We're sitting, talking, and I'm asking them a question. Okay, you do have some American equipment here already. You have Bradley. How are you training? And they tell me, yeah, we already had some training. So I tried to dig deeper and see, okay, what was the training about? They told me, well, we got behind the wheel, we drove 100 yards and stopped. And I'm trying to ask, okay, did you do anything else? Did you turn at least? No, they didn't. And I already know by that time that there will be counteroffensive on this part of the front. And they will be leading it very soon. So I do check what else were they learning. They're telling me that they learn how to reload, how to shoot the blanks. And I understand that these guys will be attacking prepared defenses of Russian troops with this level of knowledge. I did ask them who is the commander of the company, who is in charge of your battle readiness. And that's where they started pouring out and started telling how things work. I blessed them and said, guys, well, good luck. 47th, at the beginning of their way, is a very bright example of interaction between and a conflict between the pixels, how the volunteers are calling the cadre military, and the volunteers. And this is one of the big issues in our army. Why? Is that in the normal armed forces, this would have never happened. But Ukrainian armed forces were destroyed by 2014. And since 2014, they still failed to rebuild themselves, fixing different trends. In 2014, we got volunteers and people who brought with themselves to the army the spirit of rebellion, the spirit of protest. And they are clashing with the cadre. They are thinking that the cadre are dumb and don't have initiative and don't know how to fight, despite their rank. And the cadre think that these are all mutineers and they all need to be hung. So Marcus is on the cutting edge of that story. And 47th is an interesting brigade. They are fighting now very successfully. They actually managed to rebuild themselves, and they are being used to plug the holes in the front. They're showing themselves as one of the most talented infantry detachments in our army. But this tragedy overall highlights again that the army failed with integrating pixels with the volunteers. To find the best that the volunteer movement brings, and to find the best that exists in the cadre military, and use both, and join them together. And I understand that nobody has the task of doing it. There are just accusations on both sides. 47th was an attempt to do that. It was built not as Azov and not as a third, where we're completely built of volunteers. 47th was a mixture of volunteers, but without specific political ideology. They were given a lot of equipment. They were given cadre military to drive them. And military forces of Ukraine, armed forces of Ukraine, failed with this task. They failed with the proper preparation of this troop. And that's why volunteers were pushed out. Marcus was repressed. And even Marcus is being attacked by the pixels with a lot of accusations. For example, they analyzed some of his videos when he's the staff sergeant of a brigade. Instead of managing his detachment under fire, he is behaving in a certain fashion, not matching what is expected of him. And some other videos where how he's smoking a cigar with the gun on the table in front of him with all the supposed coolness, and they're attacking the visuals without seeing the core problem, which is army to that day, grinding through tens of thousands of volunteers. They're failing to integrate them properly into the system, to use their fire, to use their vigor, and to somehow train them to act accordingly to the military code, to what is expected of them under armed forces of Ukraine. So they would not be complete anarchists, but they would also preserve motivation and fire and readiness to fight. And this once again shows the level of all of our commanders, the level of all our system elements altogether, and difficult perspectives of us running to the borders of 1990 something. I'm sure most people are not even aware or sure which borders are we running to now. This is a good example of the task being more complex than people who are solving it. While in reality, it should have been done. And we could have built a great organism out of this. But unfortunately, our officers and generals, and often soldiers too, do not have appropriate levels of understanding how to solve these tasks. They don't have the vision. They very often don't know what they don't know. That Dunning-Kruger effect, right? But if you had a proper system, you could make a good military body in about a month. But we are lacking good people who know how to do that. The system of military education is dismantled. Government military policies are very poor. They are failing to name things what they are, to punish those who need to be punished, to reward those who need to be rewarded, and to find those people who can manage that rather simple and straightforward task. I am of the pixel group, right? I am of the cadre military, but I do understand the attack and the qualms that volunteers have against that system, because there is no cadre system properly. Because 90% of pixels are so that you cannot really love them for anything. Commanders who extort money from their subordinates, like in that pontoon brigade, and in some other commanders who take money, take bribes for allowing people to not fulfill the military order, or being a tyrant in their group. So the commander, such a pixel commander, who's being tortured by his command, by his superiors, and who is also expecting some social media to be able to depose him if they get a whiff of how things are going. That is not the officer who can train a jaguar, who can jerk the jaguar uptight, I'm sorry for my military parlance, put the jaguar on the chain and let him off, set him loose when needed, and feed the jaguar. These are the officers that we need to have, and this is what our system needs to train. We need to train 20-year-old lieutenants who have professional knowledge, who understand situation, and who know how to, and without excessive hysteria or fighting, to command 45-year-olds who could be his fathers. In a mobilized army, there will always be soldiers who are older than a platoon commander and a company commander, which are the core of command on the front. Can you imagine the level of training that company commander needs to have? Back in Soviet times, a 20-year-old lieutenant very often had to deal with 20-year-old soldiers. That was not a simple task. And now they have to command the 45-year-olds. And our system is failing to help this commander because he was not trained properly. He's not prepared ideologically, psychologically. He doesn't have practical knowledge, no soft skills, no hard skills. That's why we need to change the system of military education. We need to change the core of that system, the training and preparation of sergeants and officers. And that system exists in theory. There's nothing unusual. You can actually instill that and build it. But we're refusing to do it. And those who are pointing fingers at deficiencies, we write them off as Russian spies. Because apparently they are drawing attention to lackluster performance of current generals and supposedly heroes. So that's it. Negative selection in force. We have negative selection in the Ukrainian armed forces. Hey, I wanted to talk about one more topic, Alexey. You mentioned that you are a pixel yourself. You are a proponent of a cadre military. But on the other hand, for many years, starting in 2014, you were training volunteers, right? You were dedicating your time to training them. Right, and you were witnessing, Nikolai, that it was working out pretty well, right? Yeah, we do have that recorded on video. And I can have my own opinion, but there is nothing I can say against the opinion of those whom I was filming. And they were telling up front that this is tremendously useful. And who am I to contradict that, right? Nikolai, if I was given the 47th, I could make in 3 months a military body that would be an envy of the whole Ukrainian armed forces. And I know how to do it, but I don't have access to it. And they don't know and they don't want to. The only way I can see a positive exit out of this situation is in rebuilding the whole training system in Ukraine, starting with infantry schools and up to military academy and military training schools, the officer schools. Very often there was a negative selection because people who were studying there were the ones who failed everywhere else in life. So whom and how could we train and promote? So in our army, which is a rather low-level organism, this is the part, the training part is the lowest part of that organism. So they are failing in all tasks in front of them. When these tasks are not too complicated, all you need to do is literally acknowledge the recruits that arrived, train them, find their strength, help them learn how to get around their weaknesses, help them learn the code. Is such a typical story that it's not even comfortable to talk about it here. And we're failing even with that basic stuff. This should be a basic routine activity for the officer. But then we have a infighting of personalities, different heroes who are put from one brigade into another brigade to show them how to do, strange characters who don't know how to do that work, how to carry it out. To a degree that I don't know even who is right, who is wrong, but it's just everybody is wrong there. And it highlights how much our training system sucks at present and how much it got dismantled. I'm not even talking about professionalism, we're lacking basic knowledge. Where do you find that knowledge? Even for those who want to study, for those who want to train, where do they get it? Who will teach them? All those who could have taught them, they are removed from training positions for their opinions and expressing their concerns. And we have the cadre who are, crucifying the drunks in their detachment. Okay, Alexey, difficult topic. I wanted to ask you another question. Whom did our system of armed forces grew among the generals? Which figures have grown in that system? Can we boast with anybody? Well, Drapati, for example, he was a battalion commander in 2014, but now he's a commander of the army in 10 years, right? We have Gnatov, but you saw what Arty Green wrote about him. Sukharevsky, who was lieutenant near Slaviansk, and today he's a general commanding one of the branches of the military. That's quite an achievement. So we grew quite a few generals, but as they're called wild-growing officers, very often they are problematic in themselves. I'm actually an opponent of that system, of that style, because In my view, an officer needs to stay in his position for at least 2 years. Otherwise, he doesn't have enough time to learn. He doesn't have time to change his mode of understanding. Even if you're the most genius, it takes you a couple of years to change your worldview. There could be some exceptions like Napoleon's, of course, but on average, if we're talking about systemic growth in armed forces, for a year you can carry out the commander of platoon responsibilities, and after that, company and further, you need 2 years, 2 winter periods, 2 summer periods, especially the higher you get. And it's easy to divide the officers. On the lower level, you need to be able to pick the team from soldiers. They're all different, they're all real personalities, and you need to create an organic group out of them. And that's the commander of a platoon, right? Commander of a company, he has officers and sergeants who are commanding soldiers, and you have to train them. So what skills do you need to have? So at 22, you could teach 20-year-olds how to command 45-year-olds. What level of preparedness do you need to have? The level of professional knowledge, the level of training you need to have to show your soldiers. After that, you become battalion commander, a major or lieutenant colonel. These times in Ukraine, it's probably 30-year-old. So a 30-year-old battalion commander needs to train 25-year-old company commanders to train 20-year-old platoon commanders how to command 45-year-olds soldiers. Again, you can imagine the level that battalion commander needs to have, right? And you need to have the practical experience of solving these human conflicts which are inevitable. You need to understand how people are motivated and how they grow. So you need to understand the laws of psychology of military company. You need to have certain morals and will. You need to be able to distinguish certain perspectives and areas of growth and where you can apply people. And this is just going on a high level. So you can imagine how much training do they need and what kind of training do they need to get. Do you think they're getting that training? No. They're getting some basic NATO insignia, some basic NATO TikTok stuff that has nothing to do with creating real army bodies. But it looks nice on social media. So you need to change the whole system here, like in that anecdote. All right, Alexey, about everything that Marcus said in his statements, I found one phenomenal thing, which I probably saw only with you before. People were accusing him of being a narcissist, that he gives his own interviews and he is fond of himself. Nikolai, this is a case of provincialism that our public opinion is presenting. Because if you take Napoleon, he was the narcissist of the narcissists, and yet he destroyed most of his opponents who were not narcissists, right? Who cares if you are? What matters is whether you do what you're assigned to do or not. Even if he would be smoking 3 cigars and putting 4 pistols in front of him, you would still applaud him, right? Chinese have a wisdom that solves it all for thousands of years already. And it sounds like this. The hunter who is boasting at the feet of the lion who died by natural causes is despicable. The hunter who killed the lion and is boasting with that is to be praised. So doesn't matter if you want to praise. You can multiply his narcissism 50 more times, but as long as he fulfills the tasks, it's fantastic. On the other hand, he could be the most modest and well-trained person, but if he's not achieving results, if his 47th Brigade is coming to attack the enemy without any training, we saw all the videos, right, of our vehicles blowing up on the minefields. We gathered the golden human capital in that brigade, and we treated them criminally. Remember the well-known video that Butусov published? You can see that these people had balls, and in the hardest situation, they would be bandaging their own leg that was just torn off, and then they were crawling to help evacuate their unconscious friend. So these are the golden human material that we completely wasted. Where was that sergeant? Where was the training system? Well, that sergeant was specifically with them. He was not allowed to storm positions with them, so he turned off his radio and joined his soldiers in Bradley, even facing very minimal chances of survival. And I understand he was not the leader to train them. In training, he had more of a media role, and the officers had to carry out the training. So I have a question. Do you think he can provide this training by the level of his own training? The story doesn't tell us. Well, no, the story actually does tell us. Marcus is on the cutting edge of that story. He's a great human material who knows shit nothing, but has a lot of desire and fire to go and do things and achieve things. He's reflecting, he's the mirror of that situation, where you have people who are ready to go, who are motivated to go and fight for the country and die, and presenting the examples of heroism on the front. But they have no training. They were not trained properly to carry out the tasks. What do you start the training of a soldier with? Which nobody is doing in the Ukrainian armed forces. How to take a position. 75% of our soldiers get killed and wounded during changing or taking position, because they cannot determine the right position on the battlefront. They are not trained to take a right position. The first, the secondary, the backup, and then how to find their sector and how to carry out their task. But they're all trained to crawl, to shoot blanks. They're screaming, they're pulling logs, they're doing push-ups, but they're not developing tactical thinking. And tactics should be the trumping subject. Very few people know how to train that, with very few exceptions. And we should be facing a situation when we don't have just select few who know that, but we need the whole million people fighting on the front, knowing how to fight. I remember at Marusia's training in 199th, we had some drunk officer, or colonel or whoever, he was coming and telling us how to properly train soldiers. I told him, okay, sure, you want to command? Let's do it. Here you have two soldiers, give them an order to take the right position. Take a machine gun and take the right position near the birch tree. Give them the order. He failed to. He doesn't know how to give such an order. And that was a major. So, what do we want from this army? Moreover, the army is a body, is an organism. After they are trained individually, they need to be trained how to work together as a group. That's what I was emphasizing. I was giving them a good example, right? Battlefront, nobody's shooting at you, you're just laying here under the sun. And I was giving a phrase in the ear of the one on the one side, and how many times do you think that phrase was transmitted without any distortions to the other end? Not a single time? Well, after some training, yeah, they figured how to. In the norm, nobody teaches them, and yeah, it doesn't reach. Command needs to be executed properly. Communication needs to be established. They need to be trained. And then I started to distract them during that communication, thumping their helmets, shooting next to them, throwing some of the flashbangs nearby. Go, transfer. So this is how you train them. After you train their communication, that's when you start to go to the next step, and etc., etc., etc. You've seen that, shooting that People's Reservist movie that we have on our channel somewhere. But I am filled with all these emotions, Nikolai, looking at the current situation, with all my military cynicism, when we take fantastic material, Ukrainians, at the source, at the human, at the cadre source, they're one of the best materials you can have for soldiers. But the way the system treats them is a crime. It's a crime to send unprepared person to fight. It is criminal. Moreover, not having good trainings, how many of these fantastic people did we burn during training, during the actual fighting, while giving them these idiotic orders? Where are these volunteers now? We're running out of them, right? In your brainless attacks, These guys had balls to carry out the dumbest orders and to achieve success, but we ran out of them. And we're not getting new. Because new ones are looking at the way the previous ones were used, they don't really want to go there. All right, Alexey, one more question that Marcus brought up. He brought us back to the counteroffensive of the 23rd, and he was talking about the first few days, how it was happening. He actually presented a problem that was supposedly permeating the brigade command, who refused to react to the information of the intel. He mentioned Eleonora Ditkovskaya, by the way, who already was killed in the 47th Brigade, Lieutenant Colonel, who was always paying attention to the landmines. She was always bringing attention to where the landmines are. And those landmines, ignoring the information of their own intel, the command of 47th sent their people on. So when these things happen, isn't it a real crime? How it should be investigated in this case? Kolya, this is a crime that needs to be adjudicated by a proper system of military justice. That system was destroyed from 2012 to 2019, was completely destroyed in 2019, and it was utterly dismantled by that time, and rebuilding, any attempts to rebuild it are being blocked now. And as for commander, the way your most important feature that determines how good of a commander you are is whether you can use your intel. Because very often the task of the intel service is to scare everybody, right? To bring it to their attention. And very often commanders just shrugging it off and saying, well, don't matter. We're still going over. There are landmines. Don't care. Let's go over landmines. We'll take it with our spirit and the willpower. Very typical. So, okay. About the counteroffensive. There are some estimations. Very strange for me to hear that from military public service, military servicemen coming out to public, to media, that everything Marcus comes up with and tells the stories about that time, that are very few people paying attention to, except for the ones who are just, curious in this specific topic. How do you think, is it adequate or inadequate? Is it our national problem that if you do not support in what people are doing, even though they're doing some good things, stay mum, perhaps, but our people are bringing up all these estimations and accusing each other, etc. Well, Nikolai, I'll put it this way. Those people who are accusing Marcus of narcissism, they are the narcissists. They are hurting because he is drawing more attention than they do. But if you have a proper government thinking, you need to, or the system thinking, you need to understand what lies behind his statement. Even if he has 4 cigars and 5 pistols, you need to understand what problems is he bringing up to light. But it takes certain skill to do that, right? Instead, they're posting concerns. Why am I not on TV? Why are you interviewing Marcus? I could smoke cigar. I could put some guns in front of me. Or why not the officer that I like? Why you take interviews with Marcus instead? Why not that person? Some journalist was recording recently that Marcus is not a good one. Yeah, throw him at the wall, pick a different one. I don't like him. Me personally, I don't care what he looks like. How much narcissism does he have? What I care is the issues that he highlights and what our government and army system can do with it. And my answer preliminary, nothing. They're not doing anything with it. So once again, he highlighted the problems, and more problems revealed themselves by starting to attack him in the fashion they did. These are the signs of dilettantism and lack of professionalism. And unfortunately, it's very few people who can see through these statements, see the real systemic issues we have in the military. That's why we hear all these conversations. What cigars did he smoke? And did he leave the position? Did he not leave the position? They're missing the actual message. Instead of putting the list of these are the issues that he is highlighting. Let's talk with the 47th Brigade, with the commander, with the officers, with soldiers, compare that information with other brigades, find the most typical issues, find ways to solve them, and establish a systemic way of addressing them. No, instead we're discussing which pistol did he put on the table, which leg was on top, and which cigar did he smoke. This is just the level of rumors, what our society is trying to present. I don't know what we're going to win and whom we're going to win with that approach. All right, we closed the topic of Marcus, Alexey. Let's come back to the white frame, which we usually like. Trump made a statement that Zelensky needs to be ready to sign a treaty with Russian Federation. That's what he stated, I believe, right before our stream started. He said that a lot of people are dying on the front. The numbers are astronomical, not the ones that are public. And he called upon Zelensky to prepare to signing some truce with Russia. Is it forcing to peace? How do we qualify that? Yeah, this is enforcing him to peace. But one needs to understand that Trump's peace plan is a peace plan for his cadence, for his presidency. There are no other systemic suggestions, publicly at least, what could have resolved the situation at the core. So, as Alexey Kush, an economist, I think he's brilliant, and his estimations are brilliant, not only economically, but also geopolitically. I like him a lot. He's more than just an economist. He's got a strategic thinking. So he said that, look, the war in Syria is a three-phase. The war in Afghanistan was a three-phase. Phase one, the start of a conflict, the major phase is the second phase, and then the third one is conclusion. We are in a second phase now of Ukrainian-Russian conflict. Trump will freeze it. He'll have enough force to push both sides to freeze it. But the problem at its roots will not be solved, because the plan that we see is the plan of freezing the conflict, not the plan to solve it. The plan to solve the problem, the conflict, would be to create certain systemic issues between Russia and Ukraine, so the next phase of war would be impossible. And that implies that after Trump is gone, we'll likely face the third phase of this war, 5 years plus minus, right? My goal is to solve the problem at its root, to create a situation in which the conflicts and the difference of opinion would be solved by non-military measures, so that Russia would never fight with Ukraine again. And it's not only about Ukraine or Belarus. One needs to look at the whole thing of events that happened since '91 and review the whole system of security in the Eastern Europe and then wider in the whole Europe. And that would be the proper approach, figuring out the reasons and creating mechanisms that will prevent these reasons to bring to the same situations of military conflict. That's why I think it's great that Trump is stopping the war. He creates a pause to find the true reasons, because it's difficult to do that during the hot phase of war. You know, we have a populist argument in the propaganda, rather funny. You usually hear that from the party of war. And the argument is that if we stop now, in 5 years, Russia will be ready for the next phase, will be much better prepared than right now. But they're usually failing to formulate two more answers to this question. Why do you think that Russia will prepare better than Ukraine? Why do you deny Ukraine an ability to prepare itself better? And then you're attacking Arestovich for saying that our culture is small and weak. You guys are making this statement with this conclusion. And second, why do you think that Russia is not bettering itself during the war? They actually are showing that they're preparing and learning lessons in the 3 years that passed. And every other year, they're fighting a bit better than the previous. So why do you think that they're not doing it? Are you looking at yourself? The fact that we are not bettering ourselves on the Ukrainian side doesn't mean that our opponents don't do that. They actually do. So regardless, if you want to continue this war, the war will continue in a fashion that Russia will be advancing and will be bettering itself, and will probably lose that very specific coal mine that we talked about, that 30% of Ukraine GDP depend upon. So, of course, freezing the war, reloading of that whole situation. But as I said many times, I'll repeat it here again, The whole system of post-war reconstruction of Ukraine needs to be targeting the main goal, general strategic goal, preparation to the new war with Russia, to the third round, but not to fight it, but rather to prevent it from happening. I'll remind once again that the main function of the army is not war. If the army is fighting, it failed with its first function of preventing the war from happening. So, military-industrial complex, all defense system elements, and the whole government politics need to be so to prevent this war from happening, to make it so expensive for Russia that they would not even consider that. And that puts a lot of tasks in front of us to better ourselves. And we need to remove certain political reasons for this war. And that would be a political situation, political decisions. Army is just the main guarantor that political decisions will be successful. Because whatever quality of political decisions you propose to Russians, the better they will look, the stronger military we have, the stronger our military-industrial complex is. So that their party of war would understand that if they want to run to Lvov and put the Russian flag to the very westernmost point in Ukraine, they will have to pay such a huge price that they would not be ready to do it. So it would be good for us to freeze the war, I think, and then prepare for the next round in such a fashion with utmost efficiency so it never happens. But again, everything depends upon political decisions. The best solution here is to create a system when Russia and Ukraine can guarantee each other non-use of military lethal force on each other. And for that, you need to review the whole system of relations and build a new one where mutual threats are excluded, are impossible. And if there is a mechanism of competition, for example, we may be in agrarian sector, big competitors and such, these need to be resolved by other methods that exclude war and military action. This is a bigger task. You need to involve other countries, other parts of the world, and other participants. Potsdam system was created back after the Second World War. Probably it's time to create a new one. Why not? It was always being created. After a while it gets dismantled and then a new system is about to be brought. I think it's time for the new system to be built. If we figure it out, we will get probably another 10 to 15 years of peace until the situation and political elites change in Russia and Ukraine and in the world at large, and then we may need to rebuild it again. If we fail to do that, we'll get the third phase of this war with pretty harsh results for Ukraine specifically. For Russia too, but I want to pay attention to Ukraine here. And that's a very simple choice. And if you believe that today's politicians or older politicians are capable of solving it, you're very mistaken. They cannot even pose the question this way. They're selling you the propaganda about the eternal enemy, eternal fight, genocide, etc., refusing to see that this war was absolutely rationally constructed, has very rational reasons behind it, to which our American friends are pointing time and time again, the school of political realism, which I commented on this here, and all that kindergarten about 47th Brigade, the whole Ukrainian political establishment. God, give me enough power. End of the first hour.